I'm Mary Venzel White, and this is Creative Space Chats with Writers. In these 30-minute interviews, we explore creativity and the writing life, inspiration, community, and ways to spark creativity for writers and everyone else. My guest today is Carla Fountain, author of the book Bicycle Odyssey, an around-the-world journey of inner and outer discovery. The book documents the amazing trip Carla began in 1991 with her then-husband, Dermot. They spent 11 months biking around the world, and this was before cell phones and GPS, through Europe, Africa, and Asia, facing dangers and a cultural learning curve that nearly resulted in tragedy. And as the title suggests, it was a journey of inner discovery as well. And Carla continues to speak to groups often about the lessons she carries with her from this enlightening year. Thank you for being with me today, Carla. I'm excited about our talk.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So let's start with, of course, the book. Your memoir, Bicycle Odyssey, was published in 2020, many years after the trip that inspired it. And you've said the initial inspiration for that trip was another book. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, that book was written by a woman named Dermot Murphy. She's an Irish woman who bicycled from Northern Ireland all the way to the foothills of the Himalayas in the 1960s. And the one incredible thing about this is two incredible things. She did it alone, and she took all the gears off of her bicycle before she started because she thought it would be simpler that way. There would be less to repair should things go wrong. And that book, I read that book maybe about 5 years before I took my trip, and it just blew my mind that, wow, this is a possibility. I was really getting into bicycling. And I've also been, my major was French in college, and I love different languages and cultures and traveling. And I thought, what a marvelous way to see the world and meet people on a bicycle. And look what you can do with it. So I started planning after that trip.
Yeah,
after reading that book.
Right. Now, I don't know why I'm hung up on this small little detail, but for those of us novices, obviously having the gears is a big deal because that will help you. I had a 10-speed as a kid and I never mastered gears.
Well, they're good if you have to go up a hill. They make going up a hill easier. If it's just flat, if you're at the beach, you really don't need them. That's what the typical beach cruiser is. It has no gears. But if you want to climb up to, Mount Baldy or the top of a mountain, it's really helpful to have gears. It makes it easier.
Yeah, and obviously you were going to be going through all types of terrains and all types of situations and weather and everything else.
Yeah. So a lot of planning involved.
Yeah. Well, you begin your quote with, you begin your story with a quote from Henry Miller. In the beginning of the book, it says, "One's destination is never a place, but a new way of seeing things." So in what ways do you believe travel broadens our perspective? And maybe a way to get into that is kind of talking about sort of a general outline of your journey, the route that you took, and what places, surprised you, weren't maybe what you expected.
Yeah. So in those days, you could get an around the world ticket as long as you kept going in the same direction. And so we plotted, where we could go, starting in Europe and then going through Africa, Asia, and back home. And a lot of it was determined on where we could go with that ticket. Like I would have preferred to have gone to West Africa, but we had to go to East Africa.
So when you say the ticket, you mean for the train or planes?
For the airline, to get over the ocean to get to start the trip.
Interesting.
And so we would arrive in one place. The first place was London, and then we spent about 3 months in Europe. So England, Scotland, France, Spain, and then biking up towards Denmark, and then we flew to Nairobi, Kenya, and we spent 2 months biking across Kenya and through Uganda. And then we took a train back and flew to Bombay. So, and then we spent 2.5 months biking around India, and then flew to Nepal, flew to Thailand, spent a month in Thailand bicycling, and then we flew to Vietnam. So there were 2 surprises and the totally unplanned, and that was Uganda and Vietnam in that trip. We had not a thought of going. We didn't think we could go to Vietnam because it was close to Americans in 1991. It was, we didn't even think we were allowed in. But a chance encounter on the road in Thailand told us it could be possible. And then we had no thought of going to Uganda. In fact, in our minds, some of our listeners, it'll be very familiar who Idi Amin is, and others will never have heard of him. But there was a horrible war in Uganda in as recently as the 70s, and just it wasn't a tourist destination. It was places were the highlights of our trip. They were totally unexpected, unplanned. The people were the kindest, warmest, most generous, and just eager to get to know us. And that's why we traveled by bicycle, was to get close, stop in villages where no one stops, and have encounters with people that who don't talk to foreigners. And sometimes they were more excited to see us than we were. They were just so thrilled, and that was really heartwarming.
Yeah. I'm thinking of Robert Frost's, roads less traveled, or is it paths? And how serendipity could play a role in your trip.
Yes.
Did you? So you obviously planned it out. You had to, with the ticket and what stops you're going to make. But do you feel like there was an element of creativity even day to day? I mean, did you feel like your plans were constantly sort of being adjusted?
Well, we were definitely open to that and hopeful for that, because the magic of the trip was, meeting that person who invites you home and getting to know them, or stopping, wants to sit down and talk to you and have tea. And we were both, we were really good travel companions. So, a lot of people say, oh yeah, I can see, a lot of people don't travel. It was really hard on relationships, but we traveled really, really well together. That's maybe the number one thing we did well together. And we both had a similar feeling about things. So we'd meet someone and they'd tell us, oh, well, if you go down this other road, this village is having a festival, and really you should think about it. And we just, okay, let's do it. We never had to debate it if we both wanted to do something like that. So that was good. And those were the things we loved about the trip, those detours. And that was one of the big lessons that I learned from the trip, was to be open to change, and just how magical serendipity can be. And that village that we took the detour for in India, we met this 19-year-old priest who said, can I look at your cameras? I love video and your bicycles, and why don't you come to my temple? We're having our big ceremony tonight. And he took us to all the temples for all the ceremonies that week. And we were privileged guests of the village. And that was priceless. That was
something very unexpected.
Yeah.
And I imagine you really wanted to experience, off the beaten path, like you said, talk to people, get in the villages, and actually get to know people. Yes, that was the whole point of the trip. Yeah. So the itinerary, was just mainly, okay, well, we've got we know we can get from this continent to that continent, and then the rest is we'll see what happens. So we never made hotel reservations, or we stayed in humble places, or we camped. Okay. Well. I was going to ask that. Where did y'all sleep? Yeah. In Europe, we camped a lot. And in Africa, we also camped. There were places, in fact, that was like I start the book. You can get a sample of the book if people go look it up. We camped in this place, Fisherman's Camp, and beautifully manicured lawns. And
we were the only ones camping there. They had cabins. So we thought, well, we'll camp. We have our tent. We've carried it. And then that night, we heard this munching noises, and there were the hippopotamus. I did not know this at the time. Hippopotamus come out of the lake to eat at night, to graze, and they were walking around the tent.
Yeah. And in the book, and I read the book, and in the book you say it wasn't until later that we found out just how deadly they are. It's like, oh,
Yes.
you're a little scared that night, but then later when you really heard about them, yeah.
Yeah, many years later I found that out. And they had guards there with these metal poles with points on them. And I realized, oh, that's why. But the guard
I
said,
think
oh,
that's
don't
maybe a
worry.
bad sign for any campers if no one else is camping
Yes.
there. It makes you
The
go,
guard
hmm.
said, he said something funny. I said, well, will they walk into the tent? I mean, he told us they came out at night,
Right.
but not how dangerous they were. And he said, oh, don't worry, they won't trample the tent. They're very sensitive.
Okay. Okay, I guess. Did you learn anything about yourself on the trip?
Yeah, I learned how little I needed to, we have so many possessions in the West, and when we have our houses and we have, we buy things, and before the trip we rented out, we had a house and we put everything in the garage to rent it out so that would be taken care of. And there's, so much stuff in this 2-car garage. And at the end of our trip, we started out with 2 panniers. Panniers are these like saddlebags that you put on the back of a bicycle and on the front. So we had 2 on the front, 2 on the back, a little handlebar bag, and something over like the tent and the sleeping bag there. And at the end of the trip, and I think I may have a photo and one of the 5 photos I sent you, we had 1 bag each, 1 bag this big each. That's, and you just needed so little, so few possessions. And we were happy and we had everything we needed.
It's I've had that experience a little bit too, much less scale than yours. My ex-husband and I went to Europe for a month, and same thing. We were between homes and we put all our stuff in storage. And I remember that being a very liberating experience, just having your backpack and having everything put away. Like you love your stuff, but it's also nice to kind of be away from it.
Yeah, yeah.
Freeing.
So that was a big lesson, I think. Yeah, huge lesson. And then the other one was how self-sufficient I could be. We faced a lot of, in fact, we faced a lot of danger and a lot of unexpected things. And that's what got me to write the book too. I had put those journals away. I took really good journals every night because I thought I want to remember all this. And I couldn't believe some of the things that had happened. But this is my handwriting. This is my journal.
I did that.
Were so, wow, they really, caused me to feel fearful reading them. And I think maybe that's why sometimes to protect yourself, they say you forget memories. But and I was actually quite proud of myself. Wow, I went through that and I surmounted that obstacle. And so just how strong I could be, and how I could manage in unfamiliar circumstances. And so it gave me a feeling of empowerment.
Yeah. I mean, anybody that hears just the basics of your story would say that you're courageous. And Henry Matisse says creativity takes courage. So I think any of us who set out to do a writing project, that takes a certain amount of courage as well. Courage that you gained during your trip certainly probably served you. I want to talk now about, turning it into a book. What made you do such a crazy thing? Ibn Battuta was a scholar and explorer who lived in the 14th century. It's very interesting. I go in these wormholes when I research for like anything, right? A book, interview. Anyway, he traveled extensively throughout the lands of Afro-Eurasia, mostly the Muslim world, more than any other explorer in pre-modern history. He said, traveling, it leaves you speechless, then turns you into a storyteller. So how and when did you decide to turn the story of your around the world bicycle trip into a book? What was that process like? Had you been a writer before, et cetera, et cetera?
Okay, well, in terms of writing before, I'd always written for myself, but then I also have a master's in French literature, and there was like extensive writing involved in that, and in other classes too. So,
Yeah.
but I had published 1 or 2 articles about the trip afterwards. In fact, when I came back, I just couldn't stop writing about. I think one of the last places we went to was Vietnam, and I just really, it was such a surprise. And at that time, there weren't tourists there, there weren't Americans there, and it was just, it's very different. Anyone who's been to Vietnam in the last 20 years, it's changed. I probably wouldn't recognize it if I went back, because this was 30 years ago. And I wrote an article for a magazine, the bicycling magazine, but it didn't capture like the inner feelings I wanted to. It was more nuts and bolts. And that made me thirsty to actually write down my feelings and impressions more. And then when I talked to people over the years about the trip, you can only say so much in a short conversation, and there's just so much more there. And people would say, "Oh, well, have you written a book? You should write a book about this. This is so interesting." And I pulled out the journal many years later, and then I just had to. It's like I heard people in the past say, "Well, I just had to write it. Something possessed me," and that's how I felt. It was like I'd wake up and I'd just start writing, and it would just kind of possessed me.
Did you feel like it was trying to, 2 things, like kind of remember and keep those memories too, and then maybe also try to make some kind of sense out of it, or not sense, but come to some
Yes, also
conclusions? Or
at the end, as I was going through the editing with it and adding dialogue and things, it also, yes, it did help make sense of it helped consolidate my feelings about the trip and what I had learned, and I was able to relive the trip, and that was fascinating. Several times, because as writers, you're editing, it's over and over and over, and so I felt like I've relived the trip many times now, and then organizing the photos, and that felt like what a wonderful gift to myself, as well as being able to offer it to other people to read. So so I'm very happy that I did that hard work.
Memory's a funny thing, isn't it? You don't realize how much you remember. And having that journal was probably such a great thing, because I'm sure you would go to an entry and then things would start flooding in even more than you wrote, right? It's funny to think that so much could be up there, but I can't remember anything from yesterday, right? It's funny the way the brain works. So was the journal kind of just, how did you write your journal? Did you get into your feelings in the journal, or was it just kind of putting the practicalities down? Today we were here and we did this.
Well, I had 2 books. I had 2 books. So one little book was, for some reason, bicyclists are obsessed with keeping track of how many miles they went and where did. So I had one little book, a little tiny one, and where we stayed. I was trying to keep track of finances for a while, how much money we spent.
Until you were like, no, thank you. Let's not do that anymore.
And that was helpful for just knowing where the heck were we on a certain day. And then I have another journal, which was more experiences and feelings, a real journal. So the other one was just like an agenda, those little calendar agendas you get just to help keep track. So the money would last too for a year. That was always a fear, that you'd run out.
I'm sure.
So,
So when you put the book together, you kind of drew from both things?
I drew from both. I did. I did some people are going to pick up the book and they're going to wonder. I get questions like, how many flat tires did you have and how many miles did you buy?
Those are bicycle
I didn't really
people probably.
Care. I keep track of the miles, but I thought, well, it might be interesting for those who are interested. So and then it helped me know where we were in the frame of time too.
I'm sure there were repairs. That's one thing that always kind of irks me about bicycles, is that I never would ride very often. And then every time you go to get your bike, it's got a flat tire. You just want to go for a bike ride and you're like, oh no, I have to fix my bike first. So I imagine you went through quite a few.
We had a lot of flat tires. And but I think nowadays they have these tires that they have some sort of coating where you don't get many flat tires.
That would
But
be
other than a
nice.
flat tire, which is really easy to fix once you know
Yeah.
how, you should probably be able to change one in 10 minutes
Hmm.
once you know how.
Right.
And other than that, nothing went wrong.
That's
We
good.
had tools and stuff
Yeah.
to do things, or if a spoke broke, or nothing went
Yeah.
wrong.
Good.
Yeah. So
So when we talk about writing memoir, a lot of times the main thing people need to kind of get in their heads is that it's really just a part of your life. It's a story. It's you
mhm.
need to zone in and have it be a slice of something as opposed to your whole autobiography, right? And you
Mhm.
were fortunate in that starting out, you had the frame of this trip. How did you know how and where to end the book or what to say at the end to end it?
Well, so it ended with the end of the trip. But I wanted to show how it had shaped my life as well, and the influence it had on my life, and that seemed because it still has affected everything in my life from then on. Um, just the fact, you turn on the news and there's flooding somewhere. We're like, I've been there. Part of me is
Mm,
there. My cells are there. Part of I've ingested the dust there. I just feel so connected with the world and the people in it. And so I wanted to show how the trip has affected my life and the choices I made after it, career choices, things to study. Um, so that seemed to, and so that brought it up to the present as well.
well,
And
that's the thing with travel, isn't it? I mean, in a nutshell, broadening your perspective.
yes,
And I
yes,
think for creative people, the more we can broaden our perspective in any way is a good thing. That's creativity, isn't it?
yeah,
Creativity
yes,
is also
absolutely.
basically about broadening your perspective in ways. So it seems to me, or maybe it's just because I like travel and I like to justify it, but it seems to me travel and creativity go very well together.
Oh yes, and also because when you travel, your sentences are heightened.
Hmm.
Your everything is new, uh, and so you notice things more, and hopefully you bring that back with you too, and notice more when you get back. You do because you
Yeah.
come back. There's this thing called reverse culture shock, which I definitely had when I came back. Oh, there's so much waste. There's too much
Yeah.
stuff here, and but you're able to be more aware of your surroundings in your day-to-day life everywhere.
Yeah, we get in our ruts, we get in our routines, and that's
Mhm.
what we tell writers, oh, observe everything around you. But again, travel, like you just said, travel, you do that because you're not in your house and you're not in your normal,
Mhm.
paths that you go on. When did you become interested in travel? When did that travel bug kind of hit you? And because I know you've
Yeah.
traveled your whole life.
Yeah. Well, my father was in the Air Force after World War II, or World War II was still happening. He graduated from college and he became a Tuskegee Airman and went into that training
Mm,
program and decided to stay in the Air Force. So I lived in Minnesota, New Jersey, Spain, and California. But he was a navigator and a meteorologist, different points of his career. So he was always flying off and coming back with things from other, here's a doll or a book from another country, another part of the
right.
world. And that was fascinating. And my friends' fathers were always traveling, or a friend came to school and, oh, they just moved here from Italy, or, so
Mm,
we were in a community of people who were very global
yeah.
and had been many places. And when we lived in Spain, my mother took us to, I think I was 10 to 13. She took us to different countries, and on the weekends we'd go around Spain, or
Mm.
longer vacations go to other countries. I love learning languages. So I started young, and
Think you have to start
it
young.
just,
It's very helpful, I think.
and it is helpful. And so I liked learning the languages of the different places we went to on the trip too. At least the social night, please, thank you, and a few
Yeah.
numbers, and that goes a long way. People really appreciate it. It's surprising how many people don't do just even that. Um, so, and I still like language learning as a hobby for me. So I'll still, like, I went to Turkey last year for a yoga retreat, and I, studied my Turkish before I went.
Of course you did.
That was fun.
You seem like that kind of person. Do you know Turkish? Or you just picked up a
Well,
little bit to go
you
there?
learn it quickly, it goes away quickly, but they
Yeah.
say it's there in the brain. I can say, the social niceties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you need your
And ask
food or a
ask
restroom or
for
something.
things, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you have any plans for another bike trip?
I do. I'm looking at the Camino de Santiago, in
Mm.
the Santiago de Compostela in Spain, and I actually live part time there's in a place in the south of France. And the idea, the old pilgrims would shut their door and just start walking, and so that's my idea. But I'd like to do it on bicycle because it's a much longer trek than
Mhm.
your average bicyclist or walker has to go 100 kilometers or 200 kilometers by bicycle. And this would be much, much longer
Yeah.
and off the beaten path too. And uh, I like being on the bicycle. So I'm
Is
planning
there room for
that.
bikes, or you're going to be mowing down
Well,
walkers?
so I'm not going to be on the typical um,
The
popular
regular.
walker trail, which
Yeah.
starts on the other side of France, and it's very crowded. I'll be on trails that or routes that most people don't go on these days, but in the past they used to go on. So
Okay.
there used to be a pilgrimage through that area, hundreds of years ago. But today most people go to a certain area in France, a few key areas, and start there. So it's a
Yeah.
very lesser known area. And I think sometimes you go on a little on the roads too if you're on a bicycle.
That'd be
Yeah.
nice. Nice break.
Yeah, and then bring
Yeah.
a tent.
Yeah.
So lodging, you don't have to worry if there's no room at the albergue. You don't have to worry. You could camp out in the garden or at a campsite.
Is there a certain type of year when people pilgrimage, or is it all year
Well,
round?
it does get cold and in
Mhm.
the winter and snowy, going over the Pyrenees. So,
Yeah.
and it gets very hot in the summer. So
Spring and fall.
spring and fall, although a lot of people do it in the summer because that's when they have their biggest break. You
Mm.
can also do it piece by piece. So some
Mm.
people they'll take a week, they'll walk or do their pilgrimage, and they'll go back, work, and they'll come back the next year and pick up where they started. So
Oh,
that's also a possibility,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, how interesting. Okay, what about on the writing front? What are you working on now? Are you
Yeah,
working on something?
I'm working on some family history stories that I'm turning into fiction, short stories, and not just my family, but others. Like I'll meet someone and I have a friend whose great grandparents met in a very unusual way, a very romantic story, and I visited some of the places, and that happens to take place in France, and and I thought, well, somebody has to write this down. This is a
Mhm.
fantastic story, and it's fun to play with and you know research. What were they wearing? What were they eating? How would they have
Oh,
traveled? How many days did that take by donkey? So,
yeah.
and then stories that
The
my mother,
wormholes, the
yeah,
research wormholes. And then you're like 3 hours later. Oh no.
yeah. But it's a lot of fun. And then
Yeah.
stories that my grandmothers have told me and my mother,
Mm.
that are just gonna like poof disappear, but they're fascinating stories, and so I'm working on that right now.
Kind of stories set in a similar time era, or how will
Oh,
they
not
be?
as far back. Well, maybe one of them might be a similar time area actually. Yeah, and then going forward up to like the 1930s. Yeah,
That sounds
yeah.
very interesting with all of your other pursuits that you do, right? Does writing, do you make time for it, or is it hard to?
I do this when I did the book, it was definitely that, and then during COVID was when I did my editing, which was very lucky for me because I that was became my full-time work.
Yeah.
and working back and forth with the editor and refining it, and that was great. And then up until then, too, that's why it took 5 years to write the book, because I also work full time doing something else. So so that was really good. So things are a little slower now because I'm working more, but I do take time to write. Yeah.
Good. Well, I have one final question for you, and you can finish this statement. If I didn't have creativity in my life, I
would wither away. It's just it's so essential. And so one person that I worked with, at one point I was involved in filmmaking and film editing, and I worked on a documentary on an artist community in Los Angeles called St. Elmo Village, which if anyone has a chance to visit it, it's now a city landmark. It's this beautiful space covered in murals, and there was an artist there. He's since passed, Roselle Sykes, and his philosophy was, everyone is an artist. We were all created. We all have creative ability, and his whole mission in life was to pull that out of people. And he had workshops for adults and children. People could come paint, and so we all have it. We just need to, no matter what it is that we have. I mean, I've take on his philosophy, whether it's cooking, whether it's, whatever, relating to people.
That's right.
Life is so much richer when we embrace that creative side of ourselves.
Yeah, I think that same thing. And when you say creativity, people sometimes think, oh, that's not me. I don't paint and I don't write books. But I think the act of travel is an act of creativity. And like you said, the act of, it could be cooking. It could just be, to me, it's an opening of your mind and yes, maybe producing and making or doing something, but it doesn't even have to be necessarily a tangible thing. And I think everybody has it too. And if we're not in touch with that side, might run into some trouble. It's better to be in touch with it, right?
And then everybody has that creativity. One of the reasons I wrote the book too was young people I work with, colleagues, but they're a lot younger than I am. Like, oh wow, how did you do that? I could never do that. Who could afford to do that? And it's like, well, this is how I did it. It was kind of to inspire people too.
Yeah.
That it's not it sounds really remarkable too, but it's accessible.
It's achievable.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me. We're at the end of the 30 minutes. Everyone stay tuned a little bit after we quit speaking, because we're going to show some photos from Carla's amazing trip. But I do want to thank you so much for chatting with me.
Well, thank you, Mary. It was a pleasure to talk with you.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.